Well, hello there, little one. I'm so glad that you are back. Are you ready to snuggle up with Oma and read some more of our story about Hitty, Her First 100 Years by Rachel Field? These lovely little stories about this doll and all of the adventures that she goes on. Are you ready? Snuggle in. Close your eyes if you want to. Listen to the rocking chair. Listen to the crackle of the fire. Listen to the quiet rain outside. And be so glad that you're inside and cozy. And let's read about the next adventure of Hitty. Chapter 14, in which I end my heydays and begin a new profession. It was not the amiable Amos, but a different hired man who finally pitched me out of my hiding place and into a cow's stall. I think I should probably have met my own end and caused the cows considerable discomfort if a small boy had not noticed me in time to effect my rescue from her jaws. He carried me out of the barn and into the farm kitchen where a new farmer's wife was cooking breakfast for two young men who were boarders there. They were artists, and one painted hills and houses and cows under trees, scenes he called landscapes, while the other did pictures of people he called portraits. It was this one who took such an interest in me. He gave the boy who had found me a quarter for me. Then he set me up on the table between his friend and a dish of eggs and declared that he meant to adopt me for his mascot from that day on. The farmer's wife and his friend didn't seem much impressed by me. Indeed, she said I was the homeliest creature she'd ever met outside of a scarecrow. But the artist, whose name was Mr. Farley, said she didn't know true character when she saw it. After that, I felt better, and when he carried me in his canvas sack on a sketching expedition next day, I felt quite like myself again in spite of the way my dress had gone into tatters and my coral beads broken and scattered to the four corners of the hayloft. Mr. Farley was painting several portraits of people in the neighborhood, and when he took me out and showed me to one of the young ladies who was sitting to him, she agreed to fit me out in respectable clothes. She was a rather harum-scarum young lady, much more given to riding a horse and dancing than to plying her needle. But she did rip off my old dress and petticoats and make me a new set of clean but plain things. She showed Mr. Farley my chemise with the cross-stitching. This had faded so they could hardly make the letters out, but at last they did, and Mr. Farley said he felt better now he knew my name. He said I must keep it next to my person always. The only thing that can be said for my new dress was that it had a brown and white china button on at the back of the belt. Being a man, Mr. Farley was not critical of my new outfit. However, he personally cleaned the dirt from my face with turpentine and one of his own paint rags. He declared he was going to do my portrait soon. Sure enough, his next order was to paint a little girl, and he allowed her to hold me while he amused her with imaginary accounts of how I came to be in the hayloft. I could not but think my real adventures far surpassed those he made up for me. However, the child was interested and kept still, which was all that mattered to Mr. Farley. Indeed, her portrait and mine were considered equally successful. So began my career as an artist's model. After that, whenever he did portraits of little girls, I was pressed into service. And as Mr. Farley was an artist who traveled all over the country painting his pictures, my likeness must still be preserved in many places. Figuring as I did in so many canvases, I came in time to be quite a famous character in a small way. Some of you may, perhaps, have seen my features in some family portrait, and several times Mr. Farley did me in what he called a still life group. This did not appeal to me greatly, for I found it trying to be in such close quarters with dried grass and vases and onions. I much preferred the children. One shock which I experienced during this time was a sight I caught of myself in a looking-glass. Heretofore, my glimpses had been so fleeting that I had not realized what a change my years of experience on sea and land and in haylofts had made in my appearance. There was scarcely a vestige left of the bright pink cheeks the old peddler had given me. My eyes were a worn-out blue now, and the grain of my ash wood was beginning to show through. No, my complexion would never be what it had been. And I was just feeling rather depressed about this when I overheard the artist explaining to someone how superior I was to China-headed dolls, because, as he put it, I had no trying highlights. No words can here express my gratitude to him for this. I was Mr. Farley's traveling companion for a good many years, but though we visited New York and Philadelphia a number of times, I was never able to see or hear news of my former owners. Later on, we went farther south, going by boats with big paddle wheels that churned the brown Mississippi River water into whiteness in a way that seemed amazing to one who had known only square-rigged whaling vessels and clipper ships. There was, however, one distinct disadvantage in not belonging to a child. Mr. Farley kept me packed in a box with his best camel's hair brushes and his most precious tubes of paint, and we came out only after he was ready to begin work at his easel. I therefore missed seeing much of the country through which we passed on our way to New Orleans, that city which always recalls to my mind so much of elegance and revelry. It was about carnival time that we arrived, and Mr. Farley had some difficulty in finding a place to stay. The city was given up to elaborate preparations for the festivities, the processions, banquets, and balls which take place just before the beginning of the Lenten season, to think of anything else. Finally, however, he found 2 old ladies who agreed to let one of their rooms out to him. They lived in an old house in the French Quarter with a courtyard full of greenery and an iron balcony that hung over the narrow cobbled street. There were just the 2, Miss Annette and Miss Hortense Larrabee, and a Negro woman, still older, who had been a slave in their family before the war. Miss Hortense was the older and handsomer of the 2. She had been a beauty, her sister told Mr. Farley, and indeed her eyes were still very big and black, though without the shininess that they must once have had. The sisters must both have been great belles in their day. A large portrait of them painted when Miss Hortense was 20 and Miss Annette 18 hung in the drawing room, and I never tired of studying it. I found it hard to believe that the 2 wrinkled old ladies in their shabby silks could ever have been so young and pretty. Miss Hortense in canary yellow brocade with her dark hair looped over her ears and her fingers strumming a guitar, while Miss Annette in blue and sleek brown curls leaned against her sister toying with a red rose. Sometimes I think they, too, were surprised at the change in their appearance. I have seen Miss Hortense stand a long time before the picture with a queer expression on her lips, and once I caught Miss Annette peering with just the same look into the long mirror between the French windows. But I never heard them mention such thoughts, not even to one another. It was only because I, too, knew what it was to change that I could understand. That I could understand all that must be passing in their minds. Easter came late that year, so the weather was quite warm for the Mardi Gras festivities. Mr. Farley went about to see the processions go up and down the streets, but the 2 ladies were too frail to be in the crowds. They sat on their balcony listening to the music and twittered to one another about this or that float like a pair of tiny ancient birds. I could see and hear them from Mr. Farley's room, which also opened out on the balcony. Sometimes he took me out there, where all the new sights and sounds excited me about after my long days and nights of quiet. There were so many black people always going by, women with bright calico round their heads, others balancing baskets on theirs as lightly as if they had nothing in them, old men and young calling their wares in soft, deep voices. I could not understand many of these cries, for the words were often in French. Even Mr. Farley, who had been to Paris, found it hard sometimes to tell the queer way they made things sound. As the days passed and the weather grew into summer heat, the ladies retired more than ever into their cool parlors. They scarcely ever went out even at night, for their old servant bought what food they needed. Occasionally, some very old lady or gentleman would ring the bell below, and be ushered up to drink coffee. This was always a great event, and I would hear the two chattering about it for days afterwards. Sometimes, too, they were kind enough to invite Mr. Farley in for a cup. He always accepted, and once he brought me along to show them. I shall never forget the kind way their hands explored me. Their fingers were still tapering, but worn and yellow as ivory. When they were through, they complimented him upon having such a refined and charming old doll. But they both assured him that I deserved a more elegant costume. I was overjoyed a few weeks later when he was especially requested to bring me to see a friend who was drinking coffee with them. This proved to be a little old gentleman with the whitest of whiskers and the neatest of patent leather shoes. He had been a friend of their dear brother's, they said, and he had come to arrange with them about lending a beautiful embroidered dress of their mother's to a cotton exposition which was shortly to be held. It was to be a great event, indeed, almost more so than Mardi Gras. It had occurred to the two that I might be dressed in the style of their own young days, which they insisted was much more graceful than any styles before or since, and be used as a model. They pointed out that I had a most unusual expression, and that it would take only small bits of material to fit me out. They would dress me themselves, and their friend and the committee would see that I was well placed and later returned in good condition. I felt quite overcome by the honor they proposed doing me, and I could hardly wait to hear whether or not Mr. Farley would agree. Fortunately, he did. Indeed, he said it was an excellent idea, since he must leave for a month or more to paint portraits on several plantations. I know that I could leave her in no better hands than yours, he told them with a bow. Besides, he went on, I cannot but feel it is high time she saw something of her own kind. She has put up with my bachelor ways long enough. Miss Hortense and Miss Annette took me completely into the little world of their quiet upper rooms. I became as much part of their lives during those next weeks as the mahogany and rosewood furniture, the black and gilt clock under the glass dome that their father had brought from Paris years ago, and the graceful figure of a slender Chinaman with curling love-locks, flowered waistcoat, knee breeches, and languishing air, who never moved from the exact center of the mantelpiece. They always referred to him as Monsieur Romeo, and he was treated with the respect and consideration due to a valued member of the family. There was an opening between his curved forefinger and thumb, and every day he had a fresh flower put there, while once a week Miss Annette went all over him with a damp cloth. I can see her now standing on an old mahogany chair, a lavender apron tied around her tiny waist, her frail hands wiping away any speck of dust that might dare to mar his beauty. I am sure it never occurred to them that he was less real than they. He was, however, far too proud to notice my presence. My costume was a serious matter to the sisters. It must be cotton, for that was the nature of the exposition. They talked of it for several days. Then one morning they each awoke with the same idea. Sister, said Miss Annette, a little timidly, I have been thinking of the wedding handkerchief. And I, agreed Miss Hortense, nodding her head till the light twinkled on the high comb which caught up her white hair. It came to me in the night. Let us get it out and see if there would be enough. They had the servant drag out an old leather trunk, and presently they were lifting from it a satin dress of such richness and sheen that it made me think of the luster on their best porcelain cups. There were tiny pointed slippers with ankle ribbons, a lace veil that looked as if spiders had spun it in moonlight, a pair of delicate mitts, a white and silver-bound prayer book, and the handkerchief. These were the wedding things in which their grandmother and mother and two aunts had been married. The sisters took each article out as if it were alive, and when they came to the handkerchief they were more deeply affected than I had ever seen them. It seemed that this had been woven across the sea from some cotton grown on their great-great-grandfather's plantation. Their own great-grandmother herself had embroidered it as she had been taught in a French convent. After her marriage, it had always been carried by every bride in the family. No one would have felt a wedding was complete without it. But now there would be no more weddings, since Miss Hortense and Miss Annette were the only ones left. They could not help crying a little as they bent over it together. See, said Miss Hortense, there is the dove in the garland of rosebuds. Do you remember how we used to look for it when we were children? It seems a pity that neither of us will ever carry it now. Not that I mind so much for myself, but you would have made such a beautiful bride. Oh, sister, sighed the other. It does not matter about me, but you waited so long for Julian Chappelle, and then to lose him when the Yankees took Vicksburg. I am not the only one whose betrothed the Yankees took, Miss Hortense answered, and I saw the color burn red for a moment on her cheekbones. Oh, it was cruel, cruel. No one knows that better than you and I. I thought that some of the Yankees could say as much. I remembered the days in the Price household when Ruth received word that John Norton had been wounded. Little did I think then that I should be living among those they denounced so bitterly, or that I should meet any kindness at their hands. It was all so strange, beyond the understanding of it all. I was roused from these sad reflections by hearing Miss Annette suggest that I be dressed as a bride. It seems the only appropriate thing, agreed Miss Hortense. The whole exposition is to prove that we grow the finest cotton, so I am sure great-grandmother could not disapprove. Some measuring and planning and fitting as went on before scissors were put to the heirloom. The sisters pored over old-fashioned books and cut tiny paper patterns so that I should do them credit and not a scrap of the precious piece be wasted. There were ruffled petticoats to be made first from other muslin, and these must have hems and feather stitching so microscopic that even Miss Millie Pinch would have been forced to marvel. After much consultation, they decided to leave me my chemise because they quoted an old motto that said every bride should wear something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. They washed and bleached it with their own hands, however, and wondered who put the cross-stitch letters on. They placed a French knot of blue on my inner waistband, and, as for anything borrowed, Miss Hortense declared there was no need of going out of their way for this, since I myself was a borrowed contribution to the exposition. So day after day they snipped and fitted and stitched in the dim parlors, with the cries from the street sounding very soft and faint behind their closed blinds. They were like children, or a pair of birds, the afternoon the last stitch was set in place. For once I felt far superior to the Chinamen on the mantelpiece, on whom they had scarcely bestowed a glance for days. They set me up on the white and silver prayer book on the center table and regarded me in silent admiration for a long time. At last Miss Annette drew a long breath and touched my lacy veil with one finger. "Sister," she murmured with awe, "it does not seem possible we could have done it ourselves. I could almost believe that the blessed saints themselves had come down to guide our fingers." "Who knows but they have," said Miss Hortense. "It seems nothing short of a miracle that there should have been enough to edge both sleeves." Their friend, the old gentleman, was as good as his word, and I had a place of honor in the section of the hall devoted to cotton products. I sat in the middle shelf of a glass cabinet with exquisite examples of skilled needlework above and below me. I was complete, even to a miniature bouquet of white flowers in a lace paper holder, and there was a card in front of the shelf that told how I had been dressed by the two sisters out of some of the finest cotton ever woven or worked. Sometimes the crowd about my cabinet was 2 and 3 deep, and I was only sorry that the glass prevented my hearing the admiring comments. There was nothing, however, to prevent my seeing all that went on, and for the first days I sat there, I was in continual state of amazement at the changes which had taken place in people's clothes. Even after my rescue from the hayloft, and in spite of all my travelings, I had had little opportunity to see the latest styles. Now I was able to see all the elaborately draped skirts, the bustles and basques, the enormous sleeves and tight jackets, the small bonnets no bigger than fat bows which were then worn over the bangs and curls or tumbling waterfalls of the ladies' hair. It made me quite sad to see little girls going about with their mothers and fathers. Their open admiration of me was a comfort, however, for I realized that though styles may change and skirts be full or scant as fashion demands, still, a doll is a doll. I was therefore more pleased when children cried because they could not take me home, or when little girls stood with their noses pressed to the glass of my case. Then, when the governor or more famous visitors paused to compliment me. One day, after I had been on exhibition for a number of weeks, I noticed a very big, sunburned man buttoned into a blue coat with braid and brass buttons, and a wiry, tanned girl of 8 or 9 clinging to his hand. She was not so carefully dressed as most of the children who came there. Her clothes had been good enough once, but buttons were off. Her overskirt rumpled and her jacket spattered. Her bangs of dark, straight hair were so long they kept getting in her eyes, and she carried a dilapidated red silk parasol. There would have been something arresting about the quick, free way she walked and the set of her dark head, even if she had not displayed such an unusual interest in me. She kept returning again and again to my case, and I thought the man in the blue coat and braid would never be able to get her to leave when closing time came. Next morning, almost before the doors were open, she was back again, her dark eyes going over every detail of my dress and me. Even through the glass, I felt a certain fearlessness and spirit in her every motion. She was like an unbroken colt or a wild bird. The man in the blue coat was at her beck and call most of the time. It was evident she was the sort of child to get what she wanted. She wanted me, and that is the whole truth in a nutshell, as Mrs. Preble used to say. Finally, it got so that the man would come in the morning and leave her at the entrance. In a couple of hours, he would return for her, and they would go off to eat dinner somewhere. Then, like as not, she would be back to hover round my case till closing time. So it went for several days. And I must say I felt quite set up by such attentions. Nothing escaped her sharp black eyes. That is how she came to notice when the key had been left in my case for a few minutes. It happened in this way. The man in charge of that room was showing a group of honored guests over the various exhibits. One of them evidently expressed a wish to see me at closer range, so the man obligingly opened the glass door, and I was handed about amid expressions of wonder and praise. The caretaker put me back and turned the key in the lock, but just as he was about to take it out, his attention was attracted elsewhere, and the whole party walked off into another room. Nearly all the other visitors followed in their wake. Nearly, I said, but not all. There was one who stayed behind. The dark little girl had watched her chance and now came noiselessly over to my case. She looked quickly all about to make sure no eye was upon her, then turned the key with steady brown fingers. The door swung open, her hand darted in and seized me firmly about the waist. It all happened in less time than it takes to tell. Another second and the door was locked again, while I felt myself being stuffed into the red silk umbrella. I have often tried to imagine the scene that followed, when the caretaker discovered that I was not in my place as he had left me. I can picture how he must have blinked and stared at the empty shelf, at the key still firm in the lock and not a soul about to explain the mystery. Meantime, I was well out of the exposition hall. The dark little girl saw to that. Apparently, she possessed the skill and cunning of a serpent, for she slipped by the doorman, the red parasol that held its guilty treasure balanced lightly in one hand. She was well out of the way of suspicion by the time my loss must have been discovered. Evidently, she knew where the man in the blue coat was to be found, for soon I heard her talking to him. At least I supposed it must be the same, for she addressed him as Pa and told him she was tired and wanted to go down to the Morning Glory. "All right, Sally," I heard him say, "as soon as I finish figuring on next trip's cotton shipment." It was very uncomfortable being in the red parasol. The ribs stuck into me, and I knew the cramped quarters must be hurting my veil and flounces. Only once did Sally reach down and feel to make sure I was still there. I must say I began to have considerable respect for her powers. How many children at her age, thought I, could keep such a secret without giving any sign? And so, in time, I was taken aboard the Morning Glory, which proved to be a river steamboat that plied between New Orleans and the upper Mississippi, bringing down bales of cotton and fetching back merchandise and other cargoes on the return trip. Much as I regretted my theft from the cotton exposition, I could not but experience a feeling of pleasure and anticipation at being once more upon a boat and in the fortunate capacity of doll to the captain's daughter. Naturally, it was impossible for me to show my face on deck or in the open. Indeed, Sally Loomis, which turned out to be her full name, dared not even keep me openly in her cabin. I was therefore secreted in a small satchel made of sweet-smelling grass. This she kept on a shelf where she could get me out easily and where I was able to hear, if I could not see, a good deal that went on. From the first moment when she moved me from the parasol, Sally treated me with a curious mixture of awe and affection. I never knew when she took me out of hiding which mood I should find her in. She was a creature of violent and changing emotions. Sometimes, as on that first day, she seemed to regard me as some strange being out of the moon. She would sit staring at me so fixedly it seemed her dark eyes must actually bore into my wood. Or again, she would press me to her and lavish all manner of sudden impulsive caresses upon me. This alarmed me a good deal till I grew accustomed to her queer ways. Thinking it over now calmly in the quiet of the antique shop, I realized that the poor child had been too little with other children to know how to play. From infancy, she had practically run wild, for her mother was an invalid, living on a distant plantation, and too ill to care for Sally. She was allowed to make trips with her father on the Morning Glory whenever she pleased, and she pleased to most of the time. I soon grew used to the sound of the paddle wheel churning the water and the steady chugging of the engines. The captain made frequent stops to deliver small cargoes along the way, and there were shouts and singing and much conversation when we put in at different places. I think it was at Natchez, a fine city of wharves and white old houses and much pleasant greenery, that I heard Captain Loomis read a notice about me, which had appeared in the newspaper. It was several days old by the time it reached him. "Come here, Sally, and listen to this," I heard him say as they sat on deck near our cabin. "It's all about that doll you took such a shine to at the cotton show." And he began to read aloud from the paper. "Mysterious disappearance of doll at cotton exposition. Officials at loss to explain theft of valuable exhibit from glass case. Dressed by Larrabee sisters in family heirloom. Police at work on all clues. Reward offered." "Well, now, what do you think of that?" And he chuckled under his beard. But Sally made no answer. I thought I detected something strange in her silence. "Let's see," her father went on without noticing this. "Disappeared yesterday afternoon, and this paper's 3 days old. Why, that was the very day you were there. She wasn't gone then, was she?" "No, I saw her," Sally managed to reply. In a sense, it was the truth, but I could not help wondering what her father would say if he knew that I reposed in her grass basket within earshot of him that very moment. "Seems it was only loaned to the exposition," he went on as he read, "and they're real worked up over it. The man in charge of the room says he left for just a minute. When he got back, the key was in the lock, same's he left it, only the doll was gone from the case and not a soul in sight. He gave the alarm and they started searching everyone in the place, but there wasn't so much as a sign of it. They think maybe one of the caretakers took it and is too scared now to let on." There was another long silence before I heard Sally's voice again. "Pa," she said, "what would they do to anybody who took the doll? I mean, if they found out who did?" "Do?" said the captain, who had evidently begun to read of other matters. "Oh, I expect what they always do to thieves, lock 'em up in jail. Well, it's lucky we went there when we did, so's you could see the doll." Sally lifted up her voice and began to sing with great gusto. "Not for Joe, oh no, no, not for Joseph, if he knows it," a song she had lately learned. Later, when she slipped back to her cabin, she did not sing. She got me out very cautiously and sat staring at me with a queer expression. I could just make out her face in the moonlight. "I don't care what that old newspaper says," she whispered in sudden defiance. "I shan't give you back, and they won't catch me either." She gave me one of her swift embraces and put me back in the basket. A little while later, I heard her singing more songs at the top of her lungs on the upper deck. Indeed, she made so much noise that her father shouted to her to shut up and to go to bed, or he'd see she sang a mighty different tune. Nothing more was said about me. If the captain came across further newspaper notices, he did not bother to read them out loud. Besides, the days were busier now, for we stopped less often and were heading upstream. At rare intervals, when Sally had me out of my basket, I caught tantalizing glimpses through the cabin window of wide stretches of muddy brown water, of fields of cotton or sugar cane where black people were at work, of flat green bayous and moss-hung trees, of old white-pillared houses behind tall trees and gardens. I longed to see more of this river panorama, so new to me. Well, one Sunday I had my wish gratified. Captain Loomis brought the Morning Glory up to a rickety old wharf and went ashore to visit a friend who lived in a big plantation house a couple of miles back. He said Sally could not go because he had too much to talk over to be bothered with her. She could stay on the boat, or if she pleased, go ashore and see what was going on in a little cluster of cabins near the river. Some of the crew went on an expedition of their own. Others slept or lolled on deck all day. No one paid any attention to her. So emboldened by this, she brought the grass basket ashore with me in it. Once she was out of sight of the boat, she took me out and carried me about as openly as if she had come by me in a proper way. It was early afternoon. The sun shone blazing hot on the cabins and the little frame church toward which people were hurrying. They were all very black and beaming, and they carried big palm leaf fans and bunches of flowers, and some had tiny brown babies in arms. Sally and I followed after and took our places with other children on a board placed across 2 molasses kegs. It was even hotter in the church than outside. People were packed close to each other. The babies whimpered. Flies, bees, and bugs droned and buzzed everywhere in spite of the waving fans. The man in the pulpit grew shinier and shinier as he talked. He used very long words and flung his arms about a good deal. I can only remember a little of what he said, but there was one part that made a great impression on Sally. "My sisters and brethren," he began, leaning far out over the box of a pulpit, "I's going to tell you one thing sure, and that is you breaks the 8th commandment that says thou shalt not steal, you is going to be very sorry. Some of you, my brethren, has done broke it already. Some of you has gone to jail and suffered considerable, but I tell you it ain't nothing to the suffering you's going to get someday if you continues in sin and commandment breaking. And don't you imagine, my brethren, that you go on fooling the Lord forever, because he's got his eye right on you, and there ain't smallest child here that he ain't able to look right down into his heart and see if there's sin hid down there." I could feel Sally stiffen at his words, and she sat with her eyes fixed on his face more intently than I had ever seen them. I knew what she was thinking, and though presently several children went to sleep at the other end of the hard bench and tumbled over with loud cries, she did not join in the general commotion that followed. Later, when the whole congregation had become worked up and all were singing and praying and crying out that they wanted to repent of their sins, she still sat quiet in her place. It was only after they all trooped out behind the preacher to follow him down to the river that she rose and went slowly after them. I have never seen a child more spellbound than she. It was very exciting to watch the baptizing which now took place at the edge of the river. The preacher got so excited he waded right in up to his middle. He began to urge everyone who wanted to have his sins washed away to come out to him. I couldn't help thinking that they might have chosen cleaner water for this. However, everyone was too worked up to bother about the thick brown mud. So in they began to go, girls in white dresses, tall brown youths with gleaming teeth and eyeballs, and even little children smaller than Sally. Mothers would thrust their babies into other women's arms and go rushing in to be ducked up and down by the preacher, who went into a perfect frenzy with each new arrival. "Glory, glory, glory," he kept shouting as he sent each bedraggled convert to the shore. "Another soul is saved. Whiter now than the driven snow." I did not pretend to know anything about souls, but judging by the looks of their clothes when they waded back, I could not feel he was very observant. Everyone had been too busy being baptized or watching others to notice how dark the sky had grown or what immense thundercaps were rolling up. The sudden rumble of thunder came, therefore, without warning, and sent the whole congregation scuttling to shelter. From their cries and looks of panic, I guessed that they somehow connected this with the warnings of their preacher. He got out of the river very quickly, I can tell you, and joined the scramble toward the huts. But as he ran, he continued to call out words of admonition to his flock. The last I heard, he was telling them that the thunder was a warning to those who had not repented to do so mighty quick. Sally began to run too, but in the opposite direction, toward the landing where the morning glory was made fast. It was farther than it had seemed earlier in the afternoon. The sky was a queer greenish color now, and jagged forks of lightning began to rip through it. The cottonwood trees swayed in the wind, and the white patches on the bark looked ghostly in the strange light. I could feel Sally shiver and her breath come short as she sped on. We were still a good quarter of a mile from the landing when the storm caught us. Never have I seen anything quite like it for loudness of thunder, or brighter flashes of lightning, or more heavy peltings of rain. Crash! A tree went down a few yards ahead of us with a horrid ripping sound such as I had not heard since the topmast had shattered on the Diana Kate. Sally crouched under another cottonwood tree and waited for the next flash of lightning to strike us down. She was crying and praying by turns now, a queer jumbled rendering of the Negro preacher's words mixed with her own fears and petitions. "Oh, God," she wailed, "don't let the lightning strike me dead and all of a heap. Don't, please. I know I broke that commandment, same's he said when I took Hitty out of the exposition. I know I'm a sinner, and there wasn't time for me to repent and get baptized, but just wait a little and I will. Please don't let the lightning get me this time." In spite of her pleas, there came the loudest rumble and crackle yet. She cowered against the tree trunk. I was back in the sweetgrass basket by this time, but I could hear every word she said, and the lightning flashes were not hid from me. "Oh, God," she went on, still more wildly. "Didn't you hear me say I'm sorry I didn't? Didn't you?" There was another peal, very much nearer. "If you've got to strike somebody dead," she urged plaintively, "couldn't you take some of those little children over there that's all washed clean of their sins and haven't had a chance to do any more? Couldn't you?" Still louder thunder. "I tell you, I'll give Hitty back. I won't keep her another minute, Lord. Look, here she is. You can have her. Only just let me get back to Pa and the morning glory." She was sobbing hysterically now. I could hear her even above the storm. Now she was running pell-mell down the bank toward the river. I knew only too well what she meant to do with me.